and I had a cousin that's was actively involved in the Patriarchas and some other family members, and it was really weird how this happened, but I guess it came up the other day. It was Buddy Cianci's birthday, and then I kind of remembered some things that were going on. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that for a second. Also, a lot of people, we got a huge Patriarca thing coming. A lot of people don't realize how big Ray Patriarca was. He's probably the fourth most powerful mob boss in the history of organized crime. Obviously Luciano, Tommy Lucchese, Carlo Gambino, and probably Russell Buffalino and Patriarca. Those are the top of the top. And I don't think that people understand just how powerful Ray Patriarca was. So we're going to talk about some stuff that nobody knows. Stuff I got some things I got my hands on that a lot of people probably don't know about or have the ability to get their hands on. But anyway, all that being said, listen, Vincent Buddy Cianci was a lot of things in his life. He was most noted as being the most notorious mayor in the history of Providence, Rhode Island. His rise and fall was just meteoric in a lot of different ways. And in Providence, depending on who you knew and what you hear, everybody knew Buddy Cianci was on the take from day one. Like I said, my mother actually dated Buddy Cianci when she was, obviously in college. And I remember my grandfather just absolutely hated him. And I remember my cousins, second cousins, nobody ever had anything nice to say about Buddy Cianci, ever. And you're going to find out why. So years and years and years ago, I remember I asked my mother about Buddy Cianci, and she never said anything really disparaging about him other than, he was a nice guy or whatever the case, had a lot of ambitions, but his ambitions far exceeded his intelligence. And that was my mother's way of saying, he wasn't bright. Might have been book bright, but not street bright. But gauging how, Buddy Cianci would end up in prison, it shouldn't be a shock to anybody. And I think that the juxtaposition of Buddy Cianci is that, like others before him, he would have never got elected unless the mob made it the case. Cianci actually died in 2016 of colon cancer. He actually reinvigorated Providence. He was responsible for the renaissance of Providence, but at the same time, he also fucking destroyed Providence in many ways. Cianci, years before he died, because he had a radio show there in Rhode Island, he admitted that while he took a vicious sort of stance when prosecuting the Mafia, he was like a law and order type of guy. He had to be that way to win. But then on the back end, he was secretly meeting mobsters at night. Like during the day, he was meeting like attorneys, politicians, but then at night, he's meeting the gangsters. And that's the way that he just was. And he did things behind the scenes to help them out as well. How much Raymond Patriarca appreciated that in the end, says a lot. Because Cianci twice tried to put Ray Patriarca behind the wall for the rest of his life, and he failed to do so. Cianci, went to extremes to attempt to turn the lights out on Patriarca, and it's funny how he forgot who put him in charge in Providence. The real mayor of Providence was not Buddy Cianci. It was Raymond Patriarca. Patriarca ran his headquarters out of the Coin-O-Matic on Atwells Avenue in Federal Hill. Everybody knew Ray. And let me tell this for a certifiable fact. Everybody loved Ray. Providence was a much different place than it is today. Today, Federal Hill is a lot of Hispanic people, a lot of mom and pop places like Anthony's Bus Stop. They're gone. They're gone. Everything is different. I was there a couple of years ago. I didn't even recognize the hill anymore. Everything had changed. Granted, Caserta's is still there, but it's just not the same. As a kid, my uncles would go get hot suits, stolen suits from the hot suit store on the hill. In fact, in my grandfather's basement, he had more swag than Macy's. And those were the days. If I needed a suit, if I needed shoes, if I needed a dress shirt, everything was down in that basement. I could go down there and play for hours. My grandfather lived just off Smith Street on Modena Avenue. The basement was like a shopping mall to me. Anything you want, anything you needed was down there. So in 1974, Buddy Cianci had designs on running for mayor. Now, this is sort of going to sound very familiar because this is often the way politics and the mob sort of interacts. Keep in mind, prior to 1974, he had gone after the Mafia nonstop. Specifically, he went after Ray Patriarca, Jerry Tillinghast, and Bobo Marapisi. Those were the three he really wanted to get. And I can tell you that there were backroom talks about killing Buddy Cianci for a long time. The problem was that he was an outsider. Okay. Many politics were controlled by the Irish Democrats. Think of the Kennedys. I mean, the Kennedys controlled Providence and they weren't from there. Granted, I think one of them went to Providence College or whatever the case may have been. But they had a lot of control in politics in Providence, mainly Irish. Granted, the population in Providence was Irish and Italian, Portuguese. But the Irish, for the most part, controlled the Democratic machine, and Buddy was a complete outsider to everything. So in 1972, Cianci at the time was a brash prosecutor, and he had tried to convict Raymond Patriarca in a murder accessory case, and he failed to convict him. Cianci knew that he had to turn favors to get favors. Lawrence McGarry, who was the Democratic chairman, was somebody Cianci needed on his side, and McGarry had recently put it out on the streets that he would knock back the incumbent mayor, Joseph Dorley Jr. Not long after, a meeting would take place, and Cianci met with McGarry, who desperately wanted Dorley pushed out. So they want Dorley out, so they're almost willing to kind of negotiate and bring in somebody else as long as they can get Dorley out of the fucking way. Cianci, at this meeting, promised that he can definitely make sure that Dorley gets pushed out. Cianci also realizes that he has to run as a reform guy, a law and justice, like, we're going to arrest everybody, we're going to get drugs off the street. He had to do that to win. Soon after, McGarry would back Cianci and would push Democrats for Cianci all over Providence. As McGarry began to round up support for Cianci, McGarry knew that the only way that Cianci could really win was a little help from some friends. And those friends were the Mafia. So former hitman and Patriarca associate Jerry Tillinghast was somebody that was very friendly with McGarry. McGarry, in passing, mentioned that the Democrats were going to back Buddy Cianci for for the mayor run. Tillinghast was not a fan, obviously, because Cianci twice had tried to put Tillinghast in prison for the rest of his life, along with Patriarca. Tillinghast wasn't about to support anybody who tried to put him in prison, and he scoffed at the fucking idea of it. And that wasn't until Tillinghast mentions it to Joe Badway. Joe Badway was my cousin. For those of you who are wondering what my pedigree is, I can at least tell you that. That's the bare minimum I'm going to tell you. But Joe Badway was my cousin, okay? He was Raymond's eyes and ears on the streets. He was Raymond's best friend. He was his driver. He was his bodyguard. He was his union guy. So I have credentials, okay, just so people can stop with the nonsense. Joe Badway, who owned Dean Auto Body Shop, it's still in Providence, was known in circles as a tough, no-nonsense guy. And he takes the information that he gets from Jerry Tillinghast to Ray Patriarca. Not long after, my cousin Joe Badway called Jerry Tillinghast and explained to him that if they could make sure Cianci won, they could do it without hesitation. But they wanted a couple of things in return. Tillinghast has said over the years, prior to he died this year, but over the years he said he met with Cianci on his own behalf, and that's not true. He lied about that. He did meet him at one point, but it had nothing to do with the Cianci thing. Joe Badway actually went and saw Buddy Cianci directly, and they had a discussion about whatever. Not long after, so the agreement between the Patriarchas and Cianci would be that he would make sure that cold cases were dropped. He would make sure that the city had a hard time prosecuting the Mafia, and that if Cianci, if he's elected, would ensure that the prosecutors are going to have almost an impossible time making cases against anybody in the mob. What Tillinghast does do is later on, after this agreement was made, he asked Cianci to make sure that he could get, and a friend of his could get, city no-show jobs. Cianci agreed if the mob could swing the votes that he would oblige and make sure that happened. So when the votes came in, Cianci was the winner with the 709 vote difference. Close, but not really in the district. Tillinghast would not get his city job, so to speak, because he went to go see somebody about it, and they looked at him and they looked at his background and said, yeah, you're not getting this job. But what he ended up doing is getting, he becomes the union steward of Local 1033, which was a division of Public Works, which is sort of a subsidiary of a city job. So Cianci would remark years later that he lived two lives. During the day, like I said earlier, he was meeting politicians, legal scholars, and at night he was meeting with Joe Badway and mobsters. Cianci, who would go on to become a savior to many people in Providence, became really what everybody said he was from day one, a gopher for the mob. His ties to corruption are well noted. Look up Operation Plunder Dome. Obviously, Buddy Cianci gets in a lot of trouble. And I'm going to tell you a personal thing here that I've never told anybody publicly. I am related to Antonio Guerra, who is a big developer in Providence. He is responsible, if you're from New England or you're from Providence, he's responsible for the Promenade. The Promenade is the big, very wealthy building that Red Sox players live in, Patriots, Bruins. It was the old foundry. He owned the foundry, along with my Uncle Tony, who I'm not going to tell you his last name, but Antonio Guerra and my Uncle Tony. Now, my Uncle Tony is married to Antonio Guerra's daughter. So there's your connection, the relationship. At one point, when Buddy Cianci was mayor, the Kraft, the owner of the New England Patriots, prior to the promenade being built, had gone to Antonio Guerra. Buddy Cianci did, and they were going to relocate the New England Patriots to Providence, and that land was going to be used to build a new stadium for the Patriots. Whatever the issue is, it didn't work out because there was some bribes that were going back and forth. And this is not public knowledge. There were a lot of high dollar bribes going back and forth. The problem is that Buddy Cianci had somebody within his office that, with knowledge of what was going on, put a stop to it because they were afraid they were going to get caught. So that's why it never happened. And instead the promenade was built. So there you go. So that ought to tell you my family's interconnections with Buddy Cianci. But Buddy Cianci ultimately ends up getting caught doing a lot of bad things in something called Operation Plunder Dome. Look that up, Plunder Dome. So under Cianci, everything becomes a racket in Providence. You want to be a cop? Got to make a donation. You want to work for the city? Got to make a donation. That's just the way you want to work in public works. Better pay somebody. So Buddy Cianci took this whole entire fucking thing and made it a racket. So while Cianci reinvigorated Providence in many issues and in many places, he made it beautiful. He was also as corrupt as those that he went after in his early days of being a prosecutor. So probably 20 years ago, or over 25 years ago, I remember hearing my grandfather sitting at his kitchen table talking with my uncles, Joe Badway and Raymond Badway, Malcolm Badway were all at the house, and they're all talking. And my grandfather, was having a conversation, and I never met Buddy Cianci. I may have met Buddy Cianci. I'm not really sure if I ever did. I don't remember if I ever did or I didn't. I don't think I did, but I might have. I'm not sure because I met so many people through my family. But my grandfather was having a conversation with everybody, and the subject of Buddy Cianci came up. And my grandfather said that, literally, verbatim, we own that guy. He couldn't cough without permission. We did everything for him. We gave him this life, and he fucked it all up. He's a bum. So obviously, my grandfather didn't have much respect for him. And then the issue of Rubber Lips, Raymond Patriarca Jr. came up. And that was a subject you just didn't bring up in the house because nobody liked Ray Jr. Nobody did. There's a lot of politics to that. He was basically ousted and overthrown out of his own crime family, but this is what my grandfather said. He was talking about Raymond Sr. He said Raymond Sr. had everything. He ran it smooth. Then his son took over and was nothing like the father. He destroyed everything. He had no business running a family. He couldn't run a fucking deli if all he had to do was type in 6 numbers to the fucking register. They just didn't like him. Nobody did. So, the sort of ending of this short little thing is that Joe Badway, my cousin, would ultimately be arrested and indicted. He would serve time for tax evasion and some other things. but there would be a bigger scandal that would come out a couple years later between Judge Joe Bevilacqua and Joe Badway, my cousin in the Mafia, and Buddy Cianci. That is what really led to Cianci's downfall and Operation Plunder Dome. Now, while Providence may be the smallest state, it's still the most corrupt state out of all the states. It's been that way, and I don't think it's ever going to completely change. Cianci, for all that he really could have been, for all that he was, in many ways, he's still the people's mayor there. You bring a buddy, you get smiles in Providence, and I get it. He was very likable. But only Cianci could do a 4-year stretch in prison, get out and try to run to become the mayor again in Providence. And people voted for him again. It's like Marion Barry. Smoked crack, got his job back. You know what I mean? But he would ultimately lose. Cianci would serve as the mayor of Providence from 1975 to 1984, then from 91 to 2002, would pass away in 2016 due to colon cancer. Now, a lot of people have asked me throughout the years, were you sad when Buddy died? Of course I was. He was a likable guy. But if you knew the inside of it, and you knew some of the things that he did, it's kind of hard to be that upset about, somebody like that. Because he stood for law and order and morality and all of this crazy shit. But then at the end of the day, he was a victim of his own greed. And that's just, how many times in history have we talked about that and seen that? You know what I mean? So that's the short story of Ray Patriarca and Buddy Cianci and my cousin Joe Badway. Anyway, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we are going to get to the Facebook questionnaire segment.